Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parsha's Vayeshev, page 199 in the article Chumash. It begins that Yaakov settled in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. And then it continues, these are the chronicles of Yaakov. Yosef, at the age of 17, was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Yosef would bring evil reports about them to their father. So it begins once again that in verse 2, these are the chronicles of Yaakov, Yosef. The Hebrew word there is Ela Toldos Yaakov Yosef, which could also be translated as these are the descendants of Yaakov, Yosef. And the commentaries ask that why is specifically Yosef called his descendants, not the other sons, not all of Yosef's brothers. So the Rashi brings a medrash that says that the end of last week's Parsha, the end of Vayishlach, really starts on page 193, chapter 36. The Torah has an extended section enumerating the descendants of Esav. That it begins, these are the descendants of Esav. If you look at the Hebrew in 36:1, Perek Lamed Vav Pasuk Aleph on page 192, it says the same words, Ela Toldos Esav. These are what's translated here as the Chronicles, it translates there as the descendants, and it lists all of Esav's descendants, and it's an extended section of the Torah. So the Medrash says that Yaakov saw that all the descendants that Esav was going to have, and all these powerful warlords and chiefs that were going to come from Esav, and Yaakov said, how could we ever stand up to this? How could we survive? How could my sons survive contact with all these powerful chieftains coming from Esav? And the answer to that is in this week's Parsha, that it says, these are the descendants of Yaakov, Yosef. That after that whole list of all of Esav's descendants, Yaakov has Yosef, and that's all he needs to beat Yosef. That's all he needs to defeat Esav, as the verse says in Ovadia, in last week's Haftorah, actually, that it says that the house of Yaakov is like fire, the house of Yosef is a flame, and the house of Esav is straw. The same way that if you have a little bit of if you have a lot of straw, it could look very imposing. It could look very, you have like a tremendous amount of straw. It could look like it's a big job to get rid of. But all you need is one spark, and that'll get rid of all the straw for you. And that's true of Esav, that Esav looks very imposing, but just a little bit of Yosef, a little bit of the flame of Yosef is enough to destroy Esav. And in fact, it's a little bit of the theme of this week's Parsha is about two people. And if you look through the Parsha, it's really about Yosef and Yehuda. And they were to be the kings of the Jewish people in two time periods. That when the Jews were settled in the land of Israel, so the Jewish dynasty was really from Yehuda. That it was, the first king was Shaul, but he was just a king for a short time, King Saul, from the tribe of Binyamin. Then came David HaMelech, King David from the Yehuda, and all the kings were descendant from David HaMelech, from King David, King Solomon, Rechavam, etc. But after the death of King Shlomo, King Solomon, so Rechavam took over, and he did not treat the people in an easy way, and they rebelled. And the 10 tribes, the 10 northern tribes, split off from the kingdom of Yehuda, and they made their own king, and that was dominated by Shevet Yosef, by the tribe of Yosef, the tribe of Ephraim mostly. So the kings of the Jews were historically from the tribe of Yehuda and the tribe of Yosef, and in fact, our sages say that at the end of times, before the Mashiach, who's a descendant of King David, so from the tribe of Yehuda will be our king, from the tribe of Yehuda, but before that Mashiach, there will be a different Mashiach, Mashiach ben Yosef, a Mashiach, an anointed from the family of Yosef, and he'll be the one to fight against Esav, against our enemies, and be almost successful, but will die by the gates of Yerushalayim, and Mashiach of Yehuda will take over. So there's a big significance to these two families, the family of Yosef, the family of Yehuda, and the family of Yosef has that power to overcome Esav. So where we have this whole list of these powerful descendants of Esav, the Torah says Yaakov has Yosef, and that's all we need. Okay, so now moving on, it says that it said in verse 2 that he was at the age of 17. He was a shepherd. He hung out with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Those were the maidservants' wives, and he would bring evil reports about them to their father. I say to say that the evil reports he brought about them were mistaken. That he saw things that he thought they were doing wrong, but he wasn't accurate. But he brought those reports to his father because he had good intentions. He wanted his father to rebuke them and to ensure that they wouldn't sin. So he told his father, but he was mistaken, and he should have spoken to them about it first rather than go straight to his father. But anyway, in verse 3, now Israel loved Yosef more than all his sons, since he was a child of his own old age, and he made him a coat, or a fine woolen tunic. Here translates it a fine woolen tunic. It's usually translated as a coat of many colors. The Hebrew is Kesonas Pasim, like I said, usually translated as a coat of many colors. And the Kleyaker says that because Reuven sinned in the previous Parsha, and the previous Parsha, it says that Reuven sinned, it says that he messed up his father's bed, once again, whatever that means, and I'm not getting into that now, but the firstborn rights were taken away from Reuven and given to Yosef, who was the firstborn of Rachel. So at that time, before the tribe of Levi was chosen to be the ones who did the service in the temple, the tribe of Levi, specifically the family of the Kohanim, who was the family of Yosef, of the tribe of Levi, the descendants of Aaron, who was from the tribe of Levi, so that the service was done by the firstborn. So originally the service of Hashem was to be done by Reuven. Since it was taken away from Reuven, given to Yosef, now Yosef would be the one to perform the service of Hashem. So Yosef was given this coat of many colors, which represented the clothing, the special clothing that the Kohen Gadol would wear. Okay, and in verse 4 on page 201, it states, his brothers saw that it was he who their father loved most of all his brothers, so they hated him. They could not speak to him peaceably. Okay, so now Yaakov gave Yosef special treatment. It says he was the son of his old age. He was a child of his old age, so he treated him in a special manner, and the brothers hated him because of that. And in verse 5, it says, Yosef dreamt a dream, which he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, hear, if you please, this dream which I dreamt. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field. That means they were tying up bundles of grain. When, behold, my sheaf arose and remained standing, then, behold, your sheaves gathered around and bound down to my sheaf. So he said that my bundle of grain stood up straight, and all of yours bowed down to mine. His brothers said to him, would you then reign over us? Would you then dominate us? And they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his talk. That they hated him for having these dreams, that they saw him as having these fantasies of grandeur, of ruling over all his brothers. And they hated him because of his words and because of his talk. The fact that he told them, they saw that where he felt maybe that it was a prophecy and he should be telling them, they saw the fact that he was telling them he wanted to make trouble and he wanted to get them jealous of him. So they hated him both because of the fact that he was dreaming these dreams and because he was telling them to get them upset. Okay, and moving on, he dreamt another dream and related to his brothers. He said, look, I dreamt another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he related it to his father and his brothers. His father scolded him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamt? Are we to come, I, your mother, and your brothers, to bow down to you to the ground? So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Rashi understands this conversation between Yosef and his father is that this dream of the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to him, and the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, his father Yaakov understood that to mean that the 11 stars are his brothers. And the sun is Yaakov, and the moon, they understood it to be Rachel, Yosef's mother. But Rachel had died already. So he was saying that's impossible. So, and Yaakov was saying, since it's impossible for that part to come true, so the whole dream is just your imagination running wild. Whereas Rashi says that in actuality, what the meaning was, the moon represented Bilhah. who was she was the maidservant of his mother, and she was kind of like a second mother to him. The Ramban disagrees with this and said it couldn't be representing Bilhah, because when the Torah lists the sons of all the family of Yaakov who went down to Egypt, it mentions the wives of the tribes, the wives of Yosef's brothers, but it does not say anything about Yaakov's wives coming with him. And the Ramban understands from that it must be that Yaakov's wives had died by that point. So Bilhah and Zilpah Bilhah wasn't alive at that time, so it couldn't be referring to her. So he understands that the sun and the moon is referring to that time when Yaakov came down with the whole family to Egypt, and Yaakov and the rest of his family were bowed, and the rest of the family bowed down, and the moon just represented everyone who came with Yaakov. The same way that the moon is the light of the moon is a reflection of the sun. So with Yaakov, everything along with Yaakov was just a reflection of his light. And the 11 stars are put separately. The brothers are put separately because they had come at a different time. That all the brothers went up to Yosef earlier, and they all bowed down to him at that time. So it puts the sun and the moon as Yaakov and everyone with him. The 11 stars were all the brothers bowed down to him as well at a different time. Okay. So it says that, once again, in verse 11, so his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So his father said this, that the dream doesn't make sense. It must be your imagination, because he wanted to calm the brothers down. But he kept it in mind because he really understood that this was a prophetic dream and there was something to it. Okay, so in short, the brothers went out to shepherd sheep, and Yaakov sent Yosef to check up on them. And the Torah tells a little bit about how he was searching for them. And in verse 18 on page 203, once again, page 203, verse 18, they saw him from afar, and when he had not yet approached them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, look, that dreamer is coming. So now come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. So what right did they think they even had to kill him? It sounds like that they're just looking for retribution. They're angry at him. They hate him. They want to kill him. But our forefathers, the tribes, were great men. They were amazingly righteous. And this isn't something that they did just out of hand, just killing their brother. And the commentaries explain that they saw Yosef as a threat, as a rodif, as someone who's out to kill you. And someone who's out to kill you, the halacha is, the Torah says that you could kill them first, that if someone's chasing you and they're trying to kill you, you could kill them first. And that's how they saw Yosef. Because the brothers recognized that they knew their history, their family history, and Avraham had two sons, at least. They had two sons that are clear in the Torah. That is Yitzchak and Yishmael. And Yitzchak was the son that was chosen to follow in his, to carry on the legacy of being the Jewish people. And Yishmael took his own path, and he became a great nation, but he wasn't chosen to follow in the path of Abraham. Yitzchak had two sons, Yaakov and Esav. And Yaakov, one of the sons, was chosen to follow the path of his father Yitzchak, and Esav went on his own path. So the brothers felt that Yosef was angling for that situation as well. The brothers thought by Yosef coming and telling Yaakov their evil reports about them, what he was trying to do was to cause Yaakov to follow in his father and grandfather's footsteps and choose one of his sons to be the one to carry on his legacy, and the rest of the sons will take their own path, but they would not be part of the Jewish people. And that was such a threat that they felt he was trying to kick them out of the Jewish people, that they felt that he was chayiv misa, that he was liable to be killed. Okay, so it continues in verse 21 that Reuven heard, and he rescued him from their hands. Reuven heard them talking, and he disagreed with this and told them, "We will not strike him mortally." And Reuven said, "Shed no blood," in page 205, "throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hand to return him to his father." So he said that we should not kill him by hand. We shouldn't do it. We shouldn't actively kill him. But what we should do instead is passively kill him. Put him in a place that he'll starve, that he won't have any food or water, and he'll die there. But we shouldn't do it actively. We shouldn't kill him by hand. But his intention was that after they left, he would come back and rescue him. And that's what they did. And in verse 25, it says, they sat to eat food. They raised their eyes and saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, their camels bearing spices, balsam, and lotus on the way to bring them down to Egypt. Yehuda said to his brothers, what gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let our hand not be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed, and they sold him, and he was brought down to Egypt. There may have been a few different steps between selling him to Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites sold him to the Midianites, and the Ishmaelites brought him down to Egypt, and the Midianites sold him there. But the commentaries focus on the statement that Yehuda said. Remember, Reuven was the one who suggested, don't kill him by hand, throw him in the pit. He had left. Now Yehuda is telling them, let's not even cause him to die, but instead we should sell him as a slave. But the way he spoke it out is, and once again, verse 26, what gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? So commentaries ask, what kind of question is that? If they really judged him that he should die, how could they ask what gain is there? If it's a matter of justice, personal gain shouldn't factor into the equation. It shouldn't be a matter of do we profit by killing him? Do we not profit? The only question should be, is this the right thing or the wrong thing? So the Sforno says something very similar about that. I like the way the Beis Halevi speaks it out. Is that the Beis Halevi says that when it comes to crime and punishment, there are really two reasons why it's appropriate to punish somebody when they commit a crime. And those two reasons are either you're doing it for revenge, that they did something bad, you want bad things to happen to them, you want to take revenge for whatever they did, or it's about prevention, that if someone does something bad, if you allow that to occur and there are no negative consequences, so people will follow their lead. So you want to, when someone does something wrong, you want to punish them in order that there will be a deterrent from others from committing the same crime or committing crimes in general. So once again, the two reasons why society would punish someone for their crimes is either as revenge or as a deterrent. And what the brothers were saying here is that, first of all, he's our brother. And that's why in the verse it says, what gain will there be if we kill our brother? He was focusing on the fact that he's our brother. And he's saying that since he's our brother, we shouldn't take revenge. Because when somebody's family, one should be willing to overlook any transgressions against them. So he's saying if the reason why we're punishing him is revenge, he's our brother, and we shouldn't be taking revenge against him. So the other option is that it's as a deterrent. But as he continues, what gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Meaning, if we kill him and cover it up and pretend that a wild animal ate him, as what they did, so there's no deterrent factor involved either. So he's saying we shouldn't be taking revenge. There's no deterrence because people won't know that he was killed for his crime. They would think that he was eaten by a wild animal. So he's saying, what are we gaining? What are we accomplishing by killing him? There's no justice being served. So it continues, they sold him to Egypt. And on page 207, it says that they dipped his coat of many colors in the goat's blood and showed it to his father, and his father thought that he had died. And in verse 36, now the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, a courtier of Paro, the chamberlain of the butcher. So they sold him to the head Egyptian butcher. Here it translates it as butcher, which is the Hebrew is tabachim, which usually means butcher. The Ramban understands, though, that it means the head executioner of the Egyptians. And there's an indication for that from when it talks about Yosef was thrown into prison, and the verse implies that the prison, it was his owner, the chamberlain of the butcher's personal prison. So Ramban says it would make sense that he was actually an executioner, which could also be called a butcher, and that's why he was the one who ran the prison. Okay, so on page 209, it continues, it was at that time, now like I mentioned, this is also about Yehuda. It was at that time that Yehuda went down from his brothers and turned away towards an Adulamite man whose name was Chira. There Yehuda saw the daughter of a prominent merchant whose name was Shua. He married her and consorted with her. She conceived and bore a son. She calls named Er. He had another son, Onan, and a third son, Shelah. So, this section about Yehuda continues that that Er, his firstborn, married a woman named Tamar, and he didn't have any children, and Er died. He did evil in the eyes of Hashem. Er died. Then Yehuda had Onan marry Er's wife, which is the law of Yibum of the Torah, that the levirate marriage, that if a man dies without children, his brother would marry her wife. So Onan married her. He also did not have children and sinned in the eyes of Hashem, and he died. So now it was time to marry Shelah, the third brother. But Yehuda was worried. How the Ramban explains that Yehuda was worried that he recognized that they died because of their sins, and he was worried that Shelah would sin as well, and he would die. So he wanted to be able to raise him. He wanted more time to raise Shelah properly, and hopefully teach him and educate him so he wouldn't sin the same way his brother sinned. And so he wanted to wait before Shelah would marry her so he could raise him properly and educate him properly. So that's what's happening here. And then Tamar saw that he was delaying in giving her, and on page 211, behold your father, it states, and Tamar was told as follows, behold your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garb from upon her, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself up. Then she sat by the crossroads, which is on the road towards Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had grown, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And in verse 15 on page 211, then Yehuda saw her, he thought her to be a harlot since she had covered her face. So either she covered her face and therefore he didn't recognize her, and since she was standing by the crossroad, he thought she was a harlot, or because the Ramban says it could be that the custom was that the harlots would cover their face, so they wouldn't be recognized when they would come to the city. Like they would go out, cover their face, be the harlot, and then people wouldn't know who they were. So he detoured towards her by the road and said, come if you please, let me consort with you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And the Medrash says that, here it says that he detoured her by the road. The Hebrew is Vayet Elah. It means like he turned aside to her. And the Medrash says that Yehuda would not have done this if it wasn't something that was divinely ordained. And in fact, this Vayet Elah, he turned aside to her, means that he was pushed aside to her. That it wasn't something he wanted to do, but the angel who Hashem appoints over physical desire, grabbed him and pushed him there, because he said, where are kings, what are you doing walking? Where are kings going to come from? Because this union was divinely ordained that it would be the source. Once again, Yehuda was the father or the ancestor of King David and the entire dynasty of the Jewish kings. So, and it was divinely decreed that it would come from this union. So he was pushed to her by this angel to ensure that it would take place, and he would have his children with her. And it continues, and she said, what will you give me if you consort with me? He replied, I will send you a kid of the goats from the flock. I'll give you a young goat. And she said, provided you leave a pledge until you send it. She said, you don't have it with you. Leave me some kind of collateral. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet ring, your wrap, and the staff that is in your hand. And he gave them to her, he consorted with her, and she conceived by him. Then she left, and in verse 20, Yehuda sent the kid of goats to his friend, the Adulamite, to retrieve the pledge from the woman. He did not find her. He inquired of the people of her place, where is the prostitute that went at the crossroads by the road? And they said, there was no prostitute here. So he returned to Yehuda and said, I did not find her. Even the local men said there was no prostitute here. So he had promised to pay her a goat and left this collateral by her. And now they're looking everywhere for her, but can't find her. And in verse 23, so Yehuda said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. I really sent her this kid, but you cannot find her. So he's saying that they're being humiliated, searching, asking around, did anybody see her? Did anybody see her? Did anyone see that harlot so I could pay her? Which was humiliating to him. So he said, we did our part. We couldn't find her, and let her keep our collateral, because we don't want to be humiliated. And then it continues on page 213. And it was when about 3 months had passed that Yehuda was told, your daughter-in-law has committed harlotry, and moreover, she has conceived by harlotry. So and Yehuda said, take her out and let her be burned. because even though she wasn't married at the time, and the only connection was really that she was somewhat connected, because there was this mitzvah to marry Shelah, the mitzvah of Yibum, so there's a little bit of a connection there, but Yehuda was, like as we said, Yehuda was the king. He was an important person, and he was destined to be the father of the kings of the Jewish people, and he was a little bit of a king at the time as well. So for her to abandon his son was a rebellion against the king, so for that reason she would be sentenced to death. And in verse 25, as she was taken out, she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong to, I am with the child. And she said, identify, if you please, whose are the seal, this wrap, and the staff? And in verse 26, Yehuda recognized, and he said, she is right, it is for me, inasmuch as I did not give her to Shelah, my son, and he was not intimate with her anymore. And the Medrash says that because of this act of Yehuda, that's why this demonstrated Yehuda's fitness to be king, that he could have easily kept quiet and have her be burnt and not suffer this humiliation. But when he saw that the child was from him and she had not left the family, so he spoke up and said, it's for me, and she's right, I'm wrong. And that strength of character that he was able to do that, he was able to humiliate himself, recognizing that he was wrong. So that's what demonstrated his fitness to be king, that a king has to have that strength of character to make decisions, even in the face, make the right decision, even in the face of humiliation and whatever else may come of it. Okay, and in verse 27, it came to pass at the time she gave birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. And it happened as she gave birth, one put out his hand. The midwife took a crimson thread and tied it on his hand, saying, this one emerged first, so they'll know who was the firstborn. And it was as he drew back his hand, and behold, his brother emerged. And she said, with what strength you have asserted yourself? And she called his name Peretz, which means to make a breach, and that he pushed his way forward past the other son. Afterwards, his brother, on whose hand was the crimson thread, came out, and she called his name Zerach. Okay. And this whole section is introduced, once again on page 209, it says, it was at that time that Yehuda went down from his brothers. And our sages say, what does it mean at that time? What's the connection specifically to that time that this happened? And they say that what was happening at this time? What was going on? So Yosef was crying. He was being carried down to Egypt as a slave. Yaakov was mourning. He was mourning the loss of his son, that he thought his son had died. His beloved son, Yosef, had died. And Yehuda was busy trying to get married. He was finding a wife. He was getting married. But what was Hashem doing? Hashem was busy preparing the salvation of the Jewish people. That, like we said, this was the this was the preparation for the salvation of the Jewish people, both from David HaMelech, from King David, and eventually through his descendant, through the Mashiach, who would be descended from this union. So I don't remember who it was. I think it was Moshe Sternbach, or the Meshech Chochmah, I think, says the significance of this at this time specifically is that Yosef was being carried down to Egypt as a slave, which was the precipitating event. That was the event that set all the everything in motion that brought the Jewish people to Egypt and brought about the beginning, the first exile of the Jewish people, as the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. And that was set off by this event of Yosef being sold into slavery to Egypt. And because of that, the Jewish people, all Yaakov and his family, joined him in Egypt by the famine, and that started it. So at the time where the Jewish people where the stage was being set for the Jewish people to go into exile, so at that time Hashem was already preparing our Redeemer from exile, the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people from exile, which ultimately will be the Mashiach, which will come about from this union. Okay, so now on page 213, chapter 39, it states, and Yosef was brought down to Egypt. Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh, the chamberlain of butchers, a prominent Egyptian, purchased him from the Ishmaelites, who he had brought him down there. And Hashem was on page 215, Hashem was with Yosef. He became a successful man. He remained in the house of his Egyptian master. His master perceived that Hashem was with him, and whatever he did, Hashem made him succeed through him. Yosef found favor in his eyes. He attended him. He appointed him over his household, and whatever he had, he placed in his custody. So Yosef was successful. Hashem gave him favor in his master's eyes, and his master had him managing his whole estate. Then Yosef's, the wife of his master, the wife of Potiphar, tried to seduce Yosef, and he refused her advances until finally, where everybody was away, she came in and grabbed him. And on page 217, verse 12, it says that she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in his hand, and he fled and went outside. So he just ran away as she grabbed onto him to try to seduce him. And in verse 13 on page 217, when she saw that he had left his garment with her and fled outside, he called out to the men of their household and spoke to them, saying, "Look, he brought us a Hebrew slave to sport with us. He came to lie with me, but I called out with a loud scream. And when he had heard that, I raised my voice and screamed. He left his garment beside me, fled, and went outside." And she told her husband this, and her husband threw Yosef into prison. Okay, so the commentaries say that if you look in verse 12, it says he fled and went outside. And again in verse 13, that when she saw he had left his garment and fled outside. The Hebrew is vayanas vayetze achutza. In Hallel, we say in B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, when the Jews left Egypt, it says Hayam Ra'a Vayanas. The sea saw and it fled. The same word, Vayanas, and he fled. And our sages say, what did the sea see that it fled? It saw the Arona Shel Yosef. It saw the casket of Yosef. And why was it that it was because of Yosef that the sea split, that the sea fled? Because the same way that Yosef fled from the wife of Potiphar, in that merit, the sea fled from his casket. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner points out that the connection is it's not just that Yosef withstood the temptation that caused the sea to split, but it was because specifically that Yosef ran away that caused the sea to split. And he says you may think that it's because he ran away from temptation rather than overcoming the temptation that caused the sea to split. And he says you may think that it would be more significant if Yosef would have stayed and still refused her advances. That would be more significant and a greater mitzvah. But he says you see here that the opposite is true. It is the fleeing itself that made it better. The fact that he fled from temptation rather than staying and withstanding the temptation is what was meritorious, and because of that the sea split. And the reason for that is that if a person is testing themselves, they put them in a dangerous situation. And let's talk about physical danger. If a person puts themselves in a physically dangerous situation and still overcomes it, that is not showing how important that thing is to them. It's just the opposite. If somebody holds something significant and something important, they don't put themselves in a situation where failure is a possibility. And even if they succeed, it doesn't show how dedicated they are and how important the thing is. It's just the opposite. For example, if somebody has a gambling problem, and that is, let's say, that's ruining their marriage. Let's say they have a gambling problem that's destroying their marriage, and they go to Gamblers Anonymous, and they get over it for a time, that they're not gambling right now. So what's showing us stronger dedication to their marriage and and to staying away from it? If they go out to hang out with their friends in the casinos that they always frequented when they gambled and overcame the temptation to gamble, that just shows that their marriage is not so important to them, because they're putting themselves in a situation where failure is a possibility. They're putting themselves in a position where they're bringing on the temptation, and they might fail, they might succeed. And if they happen to succeed, that shows that they have a very strong desire to succeed, but not strong enough for it to be so important that they don't even let themselves have that possibility of failure. So it's better to just stay away from the possibility. And another example they give is if someone's right by a cliff. So if they value their life, they stay far away from the edge of the cliff. If they're dancing along the edge, even if they don't fall off, they're not showing how important their life is to them. It's just the opposite. Okay, so just the fact that he ran away from temptation showed how important it was that sinning was, or not sinning, I should say, was so important to him, he didn't even want to leave the possibility of failure. Okay, so then it happened after these things, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and the baker transgressed against their master, and they were thrown. So the head butler and the head baker of Paro were thrown into the dungeon, into the pit, into the jail. Yosef had gained the trust of the jailer as well and was running the facility. And they both had dreams. The baker had a dream the butler had a dream that this is after 2 years of them being in the prison. The butler had a dream. A year after being in the prison, the butler had a dream that that he saw 3 grapevines and he was squeezing the grapes into the Paro's cup. And Yosef told him that this dream means that in 3 days you're going to be freed and be put back in your old position of being the butler for Paro. The baker had a dream that he was carrying 3 baskets full of bread, and birds were to Paro, and birds were eating from the top basket. And Yosef told him that this dream is a sign that in 3 days you're going to be killed. Paro is going to take your head and you're going to be killed, signified by the fact that birds are eating from the basket on his head, where usually birds will stay away from a person. And that's what happened. Both of these things happened, and the butler, who was put back in his old position, was supposed to remember Yosef's Paro, but he forgot about him. Okay, and the Haftorah is the special Haftorah for Shabbos and Hanukkah. It is on page 1210. And skipping a little bit to 1211, I just wanted to say one thing about the end of the Haftarah. On page 1211 is chapter 4 from the prophet Zechariah. It states, "The angel had spoken with me, returned and woke me as a man is awakened from his sleep. And he said to me, 'What do you see?' I said, 'I see, and behold, there is a menorah made entirely of gold with its bowl on top, and 7 lamps are upon it, and there are 7 tubes to each of the lamps that are on its top, and 2 olive trees are near it, one to the right of the bowl and one to its left.' And I spoke up and said to the angel that was speaking to me, saying, 'What are these, my Lord?' And the angel who was speaking with me spoke up and said to me, 'Do you not know what they are?' I said, 'No, my Lord.' So you have this menorah with a bowl on its top and 7 lamps, and there are 2 olive trees next to the right of the bowl and to the left. And in verse 6, he spoke up and said to me, 'This is the word of Hashem to Zerubbabel, saying,' who was the leader of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, 'Not through armies and not through might, but through my spirit, says Hashem, master of legions. Who are you, a great mountain before Zerubbabel? You shall become a plain,'" meaning the mountains will become a plain before Zerubbabel. "He shall bring forth the main stone to shouts of beauty, beauty to it." Okay, this is very cryptic, the connection. He sees a menorah, and the meaning of that menorah he was supposed to understand meant that not through armies, not through might, but through my spirit, says Hashem. And our sages interpret this is that the menorah that he saw, it had a bowl on the menorah with tubes connecting it, and 2 olive trees next to it, meaning that this menorah was self-filling, that the olive trees were right next to the menorah, and they would squeeze them, the olives themselves would squeeze themselves into the bowl and fill up the glasses. So there was no need for human intervention. It was all done by itself, and that was the message for Zechariah to tell Zerubbabel that it's not through his strength, it's not because of him, it's not his own valor that he's going to defeat our enemies and lead the Jewish people in the land of Israel in the building of the Second Temple. And once again, he was a descendant also of King David. And it was not going to be because of his strength, but rather it's all self-perpetuating through the might of Hashem. Okay, shkoyach, everybody.